Hi everybody, we're going to get started. So in this particular exercise, you'll notice I have my screen set up a little differently and the software. I have the software set up so that we have a really small view of everybody's designs, and that's because it's actually a lot easier to see differences and similarities, especially in this one when we're really trying to create the illusion of these two hues being different, these two swatches. So if you make them really small, I think I mentioned this in my intro comments, your illusion will work a lot better and you don't have to work so hard at it. Because if it's too big, if you've got your uh, swatch. I'm not going to show the whole thing, but if you have it really big, your eye tends to like separate these colors. You know what I mean? Like we sort of jump from one to the other, and then we don't have a chance to really see the that illusion that you're building. So I just want to mention that as you're working on your revisions. Um, okay, okay, Sebastian. Yes, this is a really interesting exercise because it really shows you how colors do affect each other. You can see that right away if one color is two, this one, which I think this is a really good one because you're taking one swatch here, and it's the same swatch, right? And look how different you can make them just by the background changes. Like it's hard to believe they're even the same color, you know? Like I always think if you reached for paint swatches in the store, you'd be reaching for totally different colors, but they are in fact the same color. I just tested them right there. Um, and I think that in this particular first one colors is two, you can use color theory to help you, but you can also just experiment, until you see that they look really different. In this case, how are you creating such a different look? Well, one of the main ways is the relativity of value, which I think is, for this one as well, is one of the easiest and kind of like you get a lot of power in making changes to your background to make these swatches look, in this case, more different. So having a darker hue behind this makes this look lighter, and a lighter, I'll say swatch instead of hue, a lighter swatch makes this appear darker. Um, and yeah, and then you've also changed your hues, which can also affect the colors. So if you put blue behind this, it might look maybe a little warmer. Whereas if you put a kind of a red color, because this is a red color, it may start to look a little redder, or warmer, because that's an easy way to start moving things. It's not as powerful as the value though. It's just, the nature of it. So this looks really good. Okay, and then moving down here, the first thing we're going to look at is, are your swatches working in terms, you want to choose swatches that are different in terms of value, saturation, and hue, but you don't want to make them too different, because if they're too different, then it's an impossible task. Like it's hard to make certain colors, especially the further they are on the color wheel, like complementary colors, that is hard to make them match. But analogous colors like you have here, so you've got like kind of a teal color here, and then you've got like a more kind of classic green color here. So they're very different in hues. This one, they're both a little bit different in saturation, and this one's a little lighter. And so that's good. That's exactly what you want to do here, is you want to have them different in those three properties. And then what you want to do with the backgrounds is try to make them look similar. And I think you've done a good job with the color theory end, where so what's happening here on a color theory end? What you're doing is using ground subtraction, which I think is a really good, like it's a powerful way of making colors look more similar, is to work on the background and subtract something from the center. In this case, having the blue here, sort of very similar but a little more blue, is subtracting blue from the center and making this more green, or pardon me, I should say more gray, toned out, and you're doing the same thing here. Whereas this is a greener blue, and by subtracting the yellow from the green, because green is made up of yellow and blue, right? By taking out some yellow, you're making it also more muted, and the more muted these become, the more similar they'll become. So that's good. Um, and yeah, and so if you wanted to push this more, even a little more, what I would work on is, first of all, maybe balancing the value just a wee bit more, like making this appear a little darker or this a little lighter, right? So you could, if you wanted this to appear a little lighter, you could make this a little lighter, perhaps. Go up a little bit. See if that does. Sometimes you don't need much in terms of changing the background, so you could give that a try. The other thing you could, so sometimes just balancing the value, it kind of the change in hue can actually disappear just by making the value match, because that's actually somehow something I've learned. But if you want to work on the hue a little bit more, maybe you could maybe take a little bit more of this the hue out of here. So what could you do with that? You could maybe intensify the background, so make it more saturated. So you could go even just, you can keep the value the same and just kind of go upwards. So you're moving away from the tones, because tones are not as powerful. If you remember that lesson, tones are not as powerful, and you'll really see that when we work on these particular studies, is that like the more, saturated you get, and you can actually just go up this way or towards the shade, whichever side you want to go to, but more towards these lines is more saturated. Okay, so you could try that. Like you might just try, I mean, if you want to keep the values sort of the same, you can sort of kind of experiment, maybe up, up this way. See, maybe that does it. So that's it. Just kind of keep experimenting just a wee bit more on that one. Okay, Ethan. Yes, there is a whole lot to explore in this one, and a lot of it, as you can see what we're doing here, so a lot of it is really just practice, isn't it? Because you can know the color theory, which is really important, but then you actually just have to get in there and experiment. I remember this time I was painting a small nook in my house, and I had the color all picked out. It was sort of like a toned out. At least this is what I was aiming for. I think it was somewhere. Ooh, I don't know. Probably somewhere in there. Kind of like a mocha color, or that's what I was aiming for, or like latte color, kind of light coffee color. I was so happy about it. I thought this is going to be a beautiful color, and I painted the whole thing, and then I pulled away the drop sheet, right? Like, you paint with a drop sheet underneath, and my drop sheet was white, and the color underneath the floor was a really intense red wooden floor. And guess what? That color from the floor reflected up into the paint and made it look like lavender. It's still a nice color, maybe even a little bit more, like a kind of a sort of a pale lavender. And it was really pretty, and it turned out okay, but hey, I wasn't thinking, of color and how color can reflect and affect things. So anyhow, it's a lifelong process. Okay, so for this guy here, let's see. So you've got like a yellow, which is being very much affected by, interesting, this side looks really, it's more similar, I would say, this side is more similar to the original color. Like this looks more like this, although it's more muted, but this side is much lighter and it seems more saturated, doesn't it? And that's because I think mostly it's this dark background here, which is making this appear lighter. Changes in value, again, in the background is very powerful. One light side, one dark side, it really makes a difference. So that looks really good. So for this too, you've got two colors as one. Yes, those are, so you've got kind of a purple color and a redder color. So good. Yeah, those are changes in hue, and they're very different changes here in value. Wow. Yeah, you did a really good job with this. This is, I think, pretty impressive how much you have changed them. So what you have done here in terms of color theories, you've also worked with subtraction, which is good. So this color, you've got a background here that's bluer, that is pulling out some of the blue here. And by pulling out some of the blue, we're actually making it warmer and making it match this side. And this side, you're pulling out some of the red to kind of subdue it. And then you're balancing the values. So yeah, I think, okay, so I don't think these are matching perfectly, but that's okay. The point that I think why this is successful, and I don't think you need to really change anything in it, or actually I wouldn't change anything of it, is because you're starting with two pretty different swatches, especially in terms of the value. This is so much lighter and this is so much darker. That the fact that they're not a perfect match, they're still really, I think, quite a large amount of change has happened in here. So I think this is a success. And you've been working with all of the different properties of color here to make it work. So yeah, great job with this. Hey, Isis. All right, yes, so this looks really good. I love what you've done here. This, here on this side, it looks like a very sort of like dark navy, whereas on this side, can really see like quite a lot more of the hue, the underlying hue, the blue color. It's very different. Look how, and I love using the color picker for this just to show that it's exactly the same color. So that looks really good. For this one right here, what you want to do for your two colors as one is you want to make sure that you're changing your hue a little bit so that you have a change in hue, value, and saturation. So for example, you could take this side here and, you could just go and drag it a little bit, like for example, a little bit more towards this side. You want to keep your hues pretty close, as we've seen with the previous studies, that having them a little bit closer really will help the process, but you do want them a little different so that they're different hues. Then, just use whatever, looks like you're working with value here for the background to balance them. That's great, like a darker background and a lighter background. That's great. You can do the same thing. You may have to work with your hues, changing these background hues a little bit more. You could try ground subtraction, which again is like putting the color the sort of the same or similar color to the background or to the foreground in the background to subtract it. So yeah, so keep working with that one. Delta. Yeah, so for this one right here, you've got this kind of nice yellow color, and you're changing the hues in the background, which is really good. I do think you're getting a bit of a shift here. This looks maybe a little more, almost like a little more greenish, doesn't it? Greenish yellow than this one. This one seems a little more faded. You could probably push this one a little bit more, and the way to do that might be to lighten one side a little bit or more, lighten and darken them. You'll get a more dramatic one. So I think you're getting a little bit of a subtle shift now, and I think you could push it a little bit more. For your two colors as one, so you want to go a little further here. So you're working with the same hue and you're just, you're having a slightly different change in value, but you want to go more than what you have here. You want to change the hue, the value, and the saturation a little bit more. Because what's going to happen is, like right now, actually what's happening with your background is you're actually making them more different than they even are here. And that actually happens when your colors are too close together. Then whatever happens down here, you will notice that you can't make them closer together because they already are close together. Okay, so start with that. Start with making them a little bit more different, hue and saturation, so that you, especially hue and value, I should say, um, so that you can start working on the backgrounds to create that illusion. Vanessa, two colors as one. I think this turned out really nicely where, so you've got kind of what looks like a green color right here, whereas when you put it on the green background, it actually appears more blue. And that's what we would expect to have happen, because like if we, put a green on a green background, it'll sort of take away some of that green and make it more blue. And then in this one, it's actually looking hmm, maybe a little more green because we have a cool color behind it, sort of a cooler, bluer color. Even though it's purple, it's still more on the blue end. So that's working really well. This is also a lot lighter than this one. So that's a success. For two colors as one of the struggles you actually have here is that these two are too close together. And as we talked about in the previous one, when you have two colors that are, even though they are different hues, the values and saturation are the same. Okay, so almost the same. This is maybe a tad lighter. So you want to make them more different. Then when you start working with the backgrounds, you'll have much better chance of actually being able to manipulate them. Because right now what you're doing is you're actually making them even more different than similar. So start with two different ones. Again, you don't want to make them too different, so keep the hues the same. Just change the value and saturation so it's more clearly different swatches. Devin, your one color as two, that looks really good. This is definitely a lot lighter, isn't it? And this is a lot darker. For one color, two colors as one. So I think that these swatches look different in terms of value and saturation. I might change the hue just a little bit more on one of these. You know, they're pretty similar. So, you know, you could take one of them a little this way or a little this way, either one, you know, just to kind of give your hue a little bit of a difference. Um, and something else, so, you know, now that if you're changing the two colors as one way to make this assignment, I think a lot more powerful is if you actually kind of like desaturate your colors. So you're going to change the hue, but even just desaturate it a little bit. What that does is you reduce the amount of power that these swatches have, and then whatever you're doing in the background here will have more of a chance to overpower it and make them more similar. Because desaturated colors, they're just not as strong. Um, let's see here. Uh, so it looks like you're working mostly with value in the background. Yeah, I think you're on the right track here by making this a little darker in the background. This makes this lighter. So you can still have the same idea in terms of value, um, but just change your hues a little bit and then you know keep experimenting with your backgrounds in relation to those changes. Brittany, yes, so this looks really good. This is looking quite a lot lighter on this side and maybe even a little more like pinkish magenta. And this looks a little cooler purple and darker, so that looks really good. For two colors as one, so first of all, you want to make sure that your hue is different again, just like I've mentioned before. So, you know, again, you could go a little bit, you know, this way on one of them or this way on one of them, just to make sure that you have two different hues. For your backgrounds, I think what might be happening here, so you want this, you actually want to reverse the value study you have here, like so that the lighter one would be on this side and the darker one would be on this side. Because right now what you're actually doing is by putting a darker one on the background here, you're actually making this lighter, and you actually want it to look darker because you want it to match this side. So change your values on those side, and then work with the values a little bit more here, and then just keep experimenting. Okay, Kristen, let me see if you wrote something. Yeah, so I'm going to start with your bottom one because it's actually the same feedback as the previous exercise. Um, and with Brittany, and what you want to do here is you want to make sure your hue is different, right? So again, you know, go maybe up this way or down this way on one of them. And then with your backgrounds, you're also making this lighter by putting the really dark color there. So you want to switch the values so that they're on the other side. So, you know, because if you put a darker one behind this, it's actually going to make it lighter appearing. Okay. But start by changing your hues. Now you have a really big jump in value here, and it's good to have, you know, a nice you know, a change in value. It's a lot of change here, so you may just want to, you know, make it a little closer together. So you can see up here, so maybe not so much, you know, a noticeable change but not so much. It'll just make it a little easier. For this top one here, yeah, I think you've chosen good colors for behind what, you know, what you have behind here. Some of the things you could do to make this more dramatic is you could make the value change more. Like, so for example, you could make this a little lighter, for example, and that'll make the squares a little more, the swatches a little more obviously different. Um, you could make this a little darker if you wanted to. That would help too. So one side go lighter, one side go darker. Um, yeah, that's probably what I would do here is just push your background a little bit more. Um, you could also probably make this a little more saturated, this background. Again, more saturated colors will work more on, you know, so maybe go over here. And you'll notice then your hues will shift a little bit more because you have more hue in the background, and it'll exert more power on your inner rectangle. Okay, so I would work just a little bit more on both of these. Rob, you know, this particular assignment I think is one of those things where you really can't escape the color theory principles, you know, because it's what you need. Not necessarily for this first one, but certainly for this second one to try to solve it because it is a puzzle, you know. So I understand that it can be really challenging. So for this top one here, yeah, I think you're doing a good job with this one. This definitely looks lighter, and this looks darker. So I think you did a nice job here. And I also like putting a yellow behind it so that it kind of maybe will take out a little bit of the yellow and the orange and make it appear not so orange. So that I think is working well. So for two colors as one of the things to keep in mind maybe here is um, there, I always, you've heard me say that sometimes you need to make them a little more different. In your case, you could maybe make them a little less different just to make it a little easier. Like maybe you could take this yellow and make it, I don't know, you could make it maybe a little more, let's get the green in here. Here's the green, and then we'll go and pick the yellow. So there's the yellow. So you could kind of maybe go, you see I'm just sort of maybe bringing them a little closer together. There's a number of ways you could do that, but maybe that way, so that they're not so far apart. It'll be easier for you to work on. Um, and then what you want to do is you want to try to figure out how to work with the backgrounds to, like for example, ground subtraction would be a good thing to do here where you put a really, like with this one, you'd put a really powerful yellow behind it, like a saturated yellow right behind it. That'll take out some of the yellow, and you can do the same thing here with the green. And then you could work on balancing the values by having the appropriate background, one lighter and one darker. So I'd probably just review the color theory principles a little bit more, and you keep working on this one. Okay, Brienne, let's see here. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting assignment, a lot of new concepts. So for this one, I actually think you're getting a change here. What I would do with this is to take this color and desaturate it. You know what I mean by desaturating, like tone it out. And then, replace, just repeat the same color here. Keep the same background colors, but you'll notice that you'll get a much more powerful effect if you don't have a saturated color. Because this is, when you get a real saturated color, and we know what saturated colors are because they're up in the upper right hand corner, it's hard to push them around because they are so intense. So the less intense color in there will make it so much easier for you. So I give that a try. And again, you are getting a subtle shift here, but you'll get a more powerful shift that way. For this one right here, just make sure, oh, you do have a different hue. So actually, that's the good selection here. One's lighter and one is a little darker. So what you want to do here is maybe work a little more with the color theory. What can you do here to balance the values? You can start with just kind of analyzing the value. Well, okay, this is lighter. I want it to appear darker. What should I put behind here? Should I put a lighter one or a darker one in comparison to this? So you should just take a look at the relativity and value materials on that and try to figure out which one, and then also work with some ground subtraction here. What color would work, or any of the other ones, but what color would work behind here to maybe neutralize some of that pink or neutralize some of that purple. But I'd start with the value, because when you balance the values, that often can really take care of making them appear similar. So I would give that a shot first. So relativity and value, I think, would be really useful for you. Okay, I think that's it. Just make sure you submit your assignment as a JPEG, as I'm mentioning before. And hold on just a second here. Okay, yeah, I think that's it, everybody.